Hi, and welcome. My name is Tanya Dantis, and for those of you who don't know, and I am your host, the facilitator here of the Mayan Calendar pop-up group. I hope the video isn't doing funny effects. I know the lighting is a little bit funny right now, but if we have anyone who's on live, I'd love to know that there's no weird video effects today. And I'm here with you to talk about the topic of what is time today. So this is the first of the more practical subjects. I mentioned that the Mayan calendar is a little bit like poetry and math. And it is that way because it's very mathematical, and it's also very conducive toward interpretation. Like the archetypes, it's like tarot cards, it's just one drawing, it's a fact, it's a number, but then the interpretation is very different according to the individual who's interpreting it, right? Okay, so I just wanted to give a couple minutes to let people hop on. And I'm really glad that a couple of you were able to answer. In fact, I'm going to look at your answers right now. So I posted in the group earlier, and if you're watching the replay, just go ahead and let me know that you're watching. I'd love to know. Oh, someone's watching, but I don't know why I'm not getting the notifications here. Let's see. Okay, well, I think someone's watching, but let's see. So what were your answers on what is time? Let's look at that. What is time? I know that some people answered. Here we go. Okay. Wait, no, that wasn't it. Here we go. Okay. So I asked, what is time? And a lot of your ideas had to do with, there was one about restriction and how that sounds negative, Olivia. Time is restriction. Time is also a frame of reference for living on Earth as a human. A container. Time is freedom. Time is a construct. Time is art. Okay, well, a lot of you in here are already pretty, you're on a path of awareness, and you're already on a path of self-realization, let's call it, right? Oftentimes when I ask those things, I get answers like, it's a clock, it's seasons, it's Monday through Friday, it's a week, it's day and night, it's seasons, it's moon cycles. And something that we can start to notice when we look at those answers is that time, there seems to be two different kinds of time. There's what we could call natural time, like day and night, like the cycle of day and night, like it's due to something from nature, like the sun comes up and the moon comes up, and it's like these are cycles, right? They're from nature, natural. So what else is a natural cycle? And if you're watching and you want to comment below as you're watching the replay, I love it. So what are other examples of natural time? I'll give you a second in case you're catching the replay. Yep, if you wrote seasons, that's another example, right, of natural time. Moon cycles are another example of natural time. And so are planetary, anything kind of planetary, like Uranus, Saturn return, or things like that, right? So those are examples of natural time. And then there's something referred to as artificial time, where the time is basically, it's artificial because it's man-made, basically. And it doesn't mean that it's bad. It's just that it's man-made. It's like the clock, the construct of, it's a construct, basically. It's a creation of man. Monday through Friday, that's a creation of man. The week is a creation of man. Even The month. Like if we were to talk about the lunar cycle, that is a natural cycle or natural time. But if we're to talk about, you know, a month, then it's actually construct. Like July is a construct, right? So that's the first piece, right? So what do we use these artificial time constructs for? We use them for a couple of things. One is to tune into the cycles. Like it helps us to know like when is day, when is night, because you know there are things that we can only do when it's daytime. It helps us to know with the seasons, for example, because, well, I'm going to get into agriculture in a second, but like just simply because it's going to be freaking cold, you know, or it's going to be hot or things like this, or like there's these kinds of berries that are going to grow. We can make this. And that leads into the next thing, which is it helps us with planning. And so planning is in a lot of ways social. Like it allows us to, obviously, you know, let's hang out today. Let's hang out on Thursday. Let's hang out next week. Like to plan. And then like on bigger and bigger levels, like elections are at this time. You know, this holiday is on this day. And then there's, of course, like things that have evolved because of that, like agriculture, which is both like social and to do with the cycles. Hey, whoever's on, I'd love to know. Say hi. So I'm talking about calendars, and so then there's you might have to catch the first part. So then there's both. There's things like agriculture where it's both tuning into the natural cycles. You can't plant like a corn when it's about to be winter and hope it to grow. So you're paying attention to the natural cycles and doing some like human planning. So there's like artificial and natural, like natural time is being used to create artificial time, and we're tuning them in together. And so what calendar or way of measuring do we currently use? Hey, Jess. Hey, Jessica. So glad you're catching in. So if you're tuning in like in the middle, you might have to catch the first part just to like get the little first part, but I love having people on, so welcome. So I'm about to talk about the Gregorian calendar. So we're about to head into that whole thing. Hey, I just got your comment. Hey there. So Gregorian calendar, that is the calendar that we actually use nowadays. And most people don't know where it comes from. It's the most widely used civic calendar. So I'm going to give a little bit of history, just a little bit of frame of reference so we know what we're talking about here. So the Gregorian calendar was named after Pope Gregory the 13th in 1582. It was a refinement of the Julian calendar, which was in place for a long, long time. And the Julian calendar was the one that put in like the consideration for the leap year. And the Julian calendar was made by Julius Caesar in 46 BC. And so like that one had fallen out of sync because they were off on the whole leap year thing. And so then they made the Julian calendar. The big thing we want to know or recognize about these calendars is that they are strictly solar calendars. What the heck does that mean? Let me break that down. So back in the like pagan days, like back in like pre-Babylon and like even like Babylon and stuff, calendars were often lunar calendars, right? So there are lunar calendars, like the Hebrew calendar is a lunar calendar. In Ethiopia, they still use a lunar calendar, and in many places, and even like I think the Islamic calendar, Muslim calendar is also lunar. Actually, I know it is. So a lot of calendars are lunar, but there are calendars that are lunisolar. They're both lunar and solar. What the heck does that mean? So in a 365-day year, which is one solar cycle, there are 13 lunations, not 12, So the word month obviously comes from the word moon, right? So where we're kind of focusing our attention on right now is that somewhere in there it got off, in that the calendar, the lunisolar calendar, like the solar calendar that we use, could be lunisolar very easily, because a 365-day calendar has 13 moons in it. Our calendar does not. It only has 12. And that is like part of what I'm drawing our attention to today. So I'm going to circle back around to that, but like leave that out a little bit. The word calendar is another thing that's interesting. So it comes from the word calendus in Latin, which calendus means account book. A lot of the calendar, but it also is related to the phrase calling out, which they would call out the new moon when it was there. And when they would call out the new moon, like they would announce the new moon, oh, the new moon is there, they would, yeah, like that, I guess that was when they would like tax. And so it's interesting that at some point there was like a connection with the calendar and the moon and all of that, but then it got off course. And the whole Gregorian calendar is kind of weird, because if you think about it, July, well, let's start with, so September comes from the word like 7. October comes from, octus, which is 8. November, novus, 9. And December from Dechi, 10. And like, so it would mean that like September would be the 7th month, October would be the 8th, November the 9th, and December the 10th. But obviously that's not true. It got off sync because then they like changed the start of the calendar to be in January, because there was going to be a war. And last but not least, Julius, the Caesar, wanted, he had 31 days in his month. And then August, who, Augustus, who August was named after, wanted as many days in his month as Julius had. So then they added one of the days. They took one of the days from like, I think from February and put it on August. So like the whole vibe of the calendar has a lot of stuff that we're not aware of. But like all of you in here, I'm sure, are a little bit at least aware of how things carry a certain energy. And so it's not that we have to get rid of the calendar, but it's good to have awareness and clear some of the energy of that stuff of like ego, I want as many days as you, a war, of just like the whole taxation purpose. And if you think of how our concept of time has often become like time is money, it's so connected, right? And then we go to the clock. The clock is something that a lot of people mention when I talk about what is time. And the clock, yes, in Egypt, even as far back as in ancient Egypt, there was like shadow clocks, or like sundial type of thing, but they relied on the sun and they were useless at night or in cloudy weather. And so then they developed into like water clocks, which would like track change, which when I think about time, I often see it as a way of measuring change. But I'm going to talk about some of the teachings of Arguelles and stuff. And he talks about how the clock, it's kind of weird because they took a circle, which is in space, and they divided it into 12, and they call that time. And he says that it's like, you can't take time and divide it and consider that like time. And so he's kind of anti-clock and all that. But it's good to be aware of all these things. So, okay, so with the calendar, so now we have both things. We have the Gregorian calendar, the clock. With the Gregorian calendar, it's kind of crazy too, because they're very irregular months. So we have a month of 30 days, and then we have a month of 28 or 29 days, and then we have another one of 31, and so on and so forth. And you have to count them on your knuckle. And it's like so weird, right? When it could be as simple as as simple as a lunisolar calendar, which is 7 days a week times 4 weeks, making up 1 moon of 28 days. 13 of those would mean 364. You can do the math alongside. So 13 times 28 is 364 days. Plus, what we do here, I talk about 2 calendars. I talk about the 13 moon calendar and the Tzolkin. So we're going to talk about both in this group. And the very basic thing is that 13 times 28 is 364 plus 1 day out of time is how we do it with the dream spell, which I will talk about what the dream spell is. But it's one version, we could say, of the Mayan calendar, or one interpretation of the Mayan calendar. And what this calendar proposes is a return to more natural time. So considering both the lunar and the solar cycle, and the sacred number 13, because 13 is a sacred number of the Mayans. And as you all from like Western cultures know and can see, is that 13 was stigmatized. It became the bad number, evil. They even went as far as to take out floor 13 out of some buildings and like make it like this witch number, when in many ancient cultures it was actually the sacred number, because they say that it's the number that is about transcendence and connecting with a higher dimension. Like it's the one that helps us to connect. And when you see the synchronicity of how the lunar and the solar fit so well together, and you can see it in nature, this frequency of 1320. What is this frequency of 1320? I know Aaron and a couple others were wondering. So the proposal of, making the full circle and coming back to what is time, the proposal of José Arguelles. Who's José Arguelles? He passed a couple years ago. He was a scholar of the Mayan calendar. He was a professor at UC Davis and many other places. He wrote tons of books, amongst them The Mayan Factor and others. And I met him in Palenque back in 2004 at the Venus Transit. And a lot of the information that I received and that I was lucky enough to be connected with came from that lineage. I'm going to talk about this more on another day, because like it's a whole topic in and of itself, but that's enough for you to know like who's Arguelles. And he talked about how his proposal was that time is a frequency. So what is a frequency? It's like a radio wave, right? So instead of time being like a linear thing that's just, like taking a ruler and trying to measure it, which is space, he proposed that time is like a spiral, and time is a frequency that you can connect to different radio waves. Like you can connect to what he called the 1260. He called it 1260 because we've taken a clock and divided it into 12, and we have 60 seconds in the minute, so 1260. So the 1260 frequency is that frequency of time is money, of like, hurry up, individualism, capitalism, and that kind of hurry thing is like 1260. And I invite you, as you listen to this and you leave, I'm getting ready to wrap up soon, is you take all of this, that you let it sink in and start to connect with, how do I feel when I'm like tracking time and I'm constantly looking at my phone to see what time it is, or my watch or whatever, or when I'm really like time, like in that sense, time conscious in that sense, versus when I'm, often I'll give the example of I'm on vacation mode, like no looking at phone, no looking at time. I'm free to flow and be in synchronicity. And think of all the times that you've had synchronic things happen when you're in that flow and listening to your deeper intuition and in connection with natural time. Like, you run into people, you're like, oh my God, you meet people that are on the same frequency and like talking about the same stuff, all of that. So that frequency, the 1320, has to do with the 13 I already explained a little bit, and 20 is that the Mayans used a vigesimal system. They didn't use a decimal system. We use decimal. Decimal means 10, and 20 is vigesimal. So they counted with their fingers and their toes, like the whole body. And so it includes, so 20, and that's the reference to 20. But if you think of 13 and 20, you'll see that frequency or that ratio all over, like in turtle shells. You see it in turtle shells. You'll just see that connection. Plus, if you think of what 20 minus 13 is, you see 7, which is what is a week. 7 chakras. 7 is often a mystical number. It's just like even in Jewish tradition, 13 is when boys have their bar mitzvah. Bar mitzvah. Women, it's bat mitzvah. But like they usually say that it's when the soul enters the body. Like 13 is a sacred number, a mystical number. 20 in the Mayan tradition, and 20 minus 13 is 7, and that is also a very mystical number in many traditions. Carolyn Mace wrote a whole book about that, like how there's 7 chakras, but there's also the 7 sacraments in Christianity, and there's also the 7 in the Kabbalah. There's the tree of life, and there's the number 7 is also really important. So 1320, it's like a synchronic order of the universe. It's about getting into that synchronicity and into these sacred numbers, which are going to lead us into 5th and other dimensions. So that I'm getting ready to wrap up. So I'm basically talking about the 13-moon calendar, which is the 13 months of 28 days each, when a lunar and a lunar and solar cycle together, and the Tzolkin. The Tzolkin is the Mayan sacred count of the days. It's basically their divination calendar, which is the one that tells us what your kin or energy is. And it is made up of 20 glyphs or archetypes and 13 tones or numerals. These act together, like the 20 archetypes and the 13 tones, they each combine to create 13 times 20, 260 days calendar, or 260 possibilities of energy. And these 13-day units are called wave spells, or they're 13-day units, right? And I'm going to talk about those two a little more, but I just want to give you kind of like the overarching like picture so it can start to like sink in. And this Tzolkin, the 13 times 20, the 260 days, I already know this is a lot, so I'm that you can see, think about what is 260 days, how many months would that be, and what is significant about it. And I'm not going to give you the answer, but if you already know, please don't like ruin the surprise, but I will talk about it. But if you don't know about this, feel free to guess. Hey, whoever's coming on, feel free to guess and make your comment. And the last thing I'm going to say is someone asked a question about what is a synchronometer. A synchronometer is simply a measure of synchronicity. Because the word calendar comes from like a loaded thing, I already explained about the account book and all of that, we use a different word for a calendar. Instead of saying calendar, we say synchronometer. I'm not very strict, and so I often say Mayan calendar, but it would technically be like a Mayan synchronometer. There is a wheel that was made by like the Arguelles crew to help calculate what your kin is in the Mayan calendar, and that's called also the synchronometer. But basically a synchronometer is a tool for measuring synchronicity. It's like a calendar, like that tool we talked about. We need tools to help us plan socially. It's our way of, we need these tools. So making sure our tools are in alignment with natural cycles, like the lunar, like the solar cycles, or other cycles. The Mayans also had like a Venus calendar. They had over 20 calendars. I only focus on 2. I actually really know about 2 at depth, but all the others, there's so much to learn from them. They were like the like crème de la crème of studying the universe and astrology and the planets and mathematics. The Mayans were like, wow, really wise beyond their years about that kind of stuff. So yeah, these 2 calendars are the ones we're going to focus on, technically speaking, 2 synchronometers. So please let me know what your questions are. What's coming up for you as we're getting into this? I love hearing from you. And yeah, I will get to your comment and your questions. So love to hear what's coming up for you as we're starting to explore the module 1, what is time? And tune in to the Mayan weather forecast for today for Lunar World Bridger if you haven't yet. And I'll see you soon.